Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to this extra special Spiked conference, the new Intolerance on campus. My name's Tom Slater. I'm Deputy Editor of Spiked, and more pertinently for today, I'm also the coordinator of our two campus censorship campaigns. That's the Free Speech University Rankings, our UK analysis of the state of free speech in the academy, and Down with Campus Censorship, our student-led campaign fighting for free speech on campus. So anyone interested in those should come and column me at some point. So thank you all very much for coming. Thank you as well to the people joining us on the live stream. And what I want to do quickly is just kind of sketch out what we're planning to do for the day, what we're looking to look at. So the new Intolerance on campus. Now the prompt, of course, is the explosion that we seem to have seen over the past couple of years in censorship on campuses. More and more speakers being no-platformed, the rise of safe spaces, which is something that we're going to talk about in a moment's time, and just this general sense that the bar for censorship on campus seems to be getting lower and lower, where once there were fascists being no platform, now even feminists find themselves no platform. The rise of this new safe space mentality, and whereas previously you had to do something pretty outrageous to be censored on campus, now even donning a sombrero can get you in trouble. So our opening provocation is really, what is this climate doing? Are we turning out a kind of generation of uniquely intolerant students, intellectual bigots in that sense, who can't countenance another point of view, who want to censor other views rather than argue with them? But I think the other thing that we really want to get to grips with is look a little bit deeper into what's underlying all of this, what's been driving it. Because there's the temptation to see the rise of campus censorship as a bit of a new phenomenon, when I think many of us know that's not really the case. Making the case for free speech on campus is something that even Spiked has been doing for all of its 15 years. And of course, the problem goes way back before that. No platforming has existed since the 1970s. Safe spaces have a similar history. So what we want to really do is try and get to grips with what's underpinning this, what the history is, and how then students might challenge it. So we're going to have 3 sessions today. First of all, kicking off, once I've finished rabbiting on, we'll get into safe space, education or therapy. Following after that, we'll have a session on BDS, bigotry and academic justice, on the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement, how that impacts on academic freedom. And then finally, we'll have a debate, no platform is hate speech, free speech, really getting to grips with the kind of wider culture here in terms of censorship is going on campus, but at the same time we still live in a country where certain things we're just not allowed to say. So we've got fantastic speakers throughout the day for all of you to enjoy, but the thing I'd like to stress is this is of course about all of you as well. We want to hear loads of contributions from yourselves in the room, putting your hands up, as well as on Twitter with the hashtag #NewIntolerance, so do get stuck in. So without further ado, I'd just like to move on to our first panel, safe space, education or therapy. Now, it felt like traditionally universities were always conceived of as kind of places of unfettered debate, as well as a sense of kind of intellectual risk-taking, trying to breach into new and exciting realms of knowledge. But the rise of safe spaces, as we've seen over the past couple of years, this idea that certain students, that the university should be a kind of safe space so that particular students won't be perhaps upset or offended by certain ideas that they hear, they won't feel included, really flips those things on its head, not only by mandating certain restrictions on speech within the university space, but also creating a sense that being intellectually and emotionally comfortable is almost the paramount thing a university can provide. And really what we're going to debate here today is whether or not that really completely undermines the point of a university, whether it patronises students, or indeed, as proponents of safe space argue, that this is actually a way of expanding freedom of speech, of allowing people who would otherwise be too fearful of speaking up to contribute to the discussion. So to discuss all of this, we've got a really fantastic panel who are now introduced in the order in which they'll speak. So on my far right is Naomi Firsht. Naomi is a reporter for the Jewish Chronicle, as well as a regular contributor to Spiked. Following on from Naomi will be, on my immediate right, is Siobhan Fenton, who's a freelance journalist, writing mainly for The Independent, and a master's student in gender studies at Newnham College, Cambridge. After Siobhan, on my immediate left is Ella Whelan, who is staff writer at Spiked and one of the main coordinators of our campus free speech campaigns. And finally, on the far left is Abby Wilkinson, who's a freelance writer for The Independent, politics.co.uk, and many more. So the speakers are going to have about 5 minutes each for their opening speeches. I'm going to be quite strict on times and kind of pass you passive-aggressive notes and things to make sure that you're keeping to time. And then as soon as we can after that, I'll throw it back out to the audience for rounds of question and answer to really get into this discussion. So without further ado, Naomi, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. Okay, so the concept of safe spaces isn't really anything new. Something that came about in the 1970s, mainly for women and people involved in the gay liberation movements, and it was more a space for actual physical safety. Now today, safe spaces have become much more far-reaching. The Goldsmith Student Union Safe Space Policy says, the safe space policy is designed to protect oppressed groups and enable their full participation in the student union. GSU is committed to operating as a space which is inclusive and supportive, in which no forms of discrimination are tolerated. And, that sounds lovely, but then if you go on to read the 3-page long guidelines, you realize it's really more about policing students' thoughts, their language, and even their interactions with each other. The guidelines say, be aware of the connotations of your language. Many common expressions use discriminatory language, so think before speaking. It continues, do not make assumptions about anyone's gender, pronouns, sexual preference, abilities, ethnic identity, survivor status, or life experiences. Do not be derogatory to anyone about these things. And finally, respect each other's physical and emotional boundaries. Always get explicit verbal consent before touching someone or crossing boundaries. So you can see it really seems like a kind of code for protecting students' feelings and stopping people from being offended. And under the guise of protecting these so-called vulnerable groups, safe spaces have led to further censorship across campuses. In some cases, outright bans. Goldsmiths itself banned its Socialist Worker Student Society, and they have a policy asking student clubs to state their commitment to challenging lad culture. No platform policies where speakers aren't even allowed to come and speak on campuses are now widespread in the UK. You get this absurd range of banning actions. Songs have been banned, the Sun newspaper, lads magazines. Edinburgh Student Union has this bizarre costumes policy whereby it's prohibited to dress up as, amongst other things, Mexicans, mental patients, and Ched Evans. In the latest season of South Park, there was an excellent episode on safe spaces. And in this episode, Cartman sings a lovely song about how safe he is in his sheltered space. And what he's sheltering from is this evil-looking character known as reality. And I think that's exactly what safe spaces are demanding. They are students asking for a buffer between them and the real world. And yet, while these policies demand safety for their students, in reality it only applies to certain groups. And there's some glaring hypocrisy within the whole safe space concept. One of the biggest examples that I can think of is with Jewish and pro-Israel students, which is something I see all the time at the Jewish Chronicle. Just a few weeks ago, we saw the incident at King's College London where an Israel Society event was violently disrupted by protesters who were banging on windows, setting off fire alarms. I think a window got smashed. Someone said they got hit. And the students who were in the room, they said they were terrified, and yet inside the room where the talk was happening, on the board, there's a sign declaring King's College is a safe space. That's not a physically safe space, never mind anything else. Even this week, we've seen the co-chair of the Oxford University Labour Club has resigned because of anti-Semitism within the club. He's not even Jewish. So it seems to be that the safe space policy, in any case, only really applies to those who agree with the student union groupthink. Jewish students aren't the only groups that are the exception. There's also, I think, young male students have also been penalised a lot by these kinds of policies, with this sort of crackdown on lad culture. In LSE, the Rugby Society was banned because they apparently published a sexist pamphlet. But I think, in the end, all students lose out with safe space policies. They're patronising to everyone, whether you're in one of these so-called marginal groups or not, because the policy makes the assumption that students are unable to handle ideas, language, or people that they might disagree with. But they aren't children. Once you're a student, you're 18, you're a young adult, and if you can't cope with those kinds of situations, then perhaps university is a good place to learn how.
Thank you very much. And Siobhan.
So personally, I would say that from what I find, that safe spaces are kind of like the shark attacks of the free speech debate, that most people have heard of them and it's all over the media and it's this ominous threat, but no one's really ever actually been in one or encountered one or met many people who actually have. In my experience, safe spaces, I don't think they're as common in universities as we think. I think they're much more common in American universities than on UK campuses. And the safe spaces that I've encountered, I think I would agree with a lot of what Naomi has said. Is I think that there is a certain amount, well, I'd be very cautious about the extent to which they are really tenable, and I think we're getting to the point now where a lot of safe spaces are kind of eating themselves up within their own kind of left-wing logic. But I do think that they do have some merits. The ones that I've been to so far, that I've experienced personally with safe spaces, is that there's one where a large number of people, as part of the discussion, had autism, and so they asked that people, instead of shouting very loudly or clapping very loudly, if people could not do that, just to respect people there who had autism. I don't think that's oppression or censorship. I think that's sort of primarily etiquette. And I think that lots of safe space features are about that. It's just sort of kind of it's more facilitating free speech and free discussion because you're allowing other people to be involved. However, I do think that we do need to be careful about whether or not people are retreating into a bubble where they kind of only affirm their own ideas. I think that that's particularly concerning in terms of ideas of extremism, that some people can just say it's their safe space and so no one's allowed to disagree with anything they say. But most people I know who would organise in safe spaces are very much engaged in debates around those issues that, whilst they might discuss for an hour or two in a particular feminist discussion group about sexual violence, they'll discuss that. They'll also be involved in a lot more sort of activism, engagement with other ideas about what they're discussing. So it's not just kind of people reaffirming themselves, but I do think that is something we definitely need to avoid. I think it's, as Naomi has suggested, life isn't a safe space, and that people, if they go to university and they only have these reaffirmations of their own thoughts, they get a shock when they graduate. But I think that's in many ways precisely why safe spaces are okay, because it is very difficult for people to only experience their own ideas and not have them constantly challenged. I think whether it's at university or out sort of in the wider world. Another issue that I found with safe spaces is that, ironically, I find they can tend to kind of actually become quite elitist in themselves. I find sometimes with NES groups, they have so many incredibly convoluted and precise policies about different hand gestures you have to use when discussing people and different pronoun usages, that sometimes, ironically, that can make it quite an elitist thing, that you have to know all of these rules, and if you're not part of a particular NES clique, then you can't take part, which completely self-defeats the idea that safe spaces are about equality and more people taking part. But overall, I would say that, from my experiences, safe spaces aren't quite as menacing and destructive as people think. I think there can be a lot of hypocrisy there, and there are a lot of tensions to be drawn out. But overall, I don't think they're quite these sort of little festering bubbles that some people are kind of particularly afraid of.
Thank you very much. And Ella.
So I think safe spaces absolutely do stifle debate, and it's just the nature of them. By making a space or passing a policy in which you say certain things are allowed and certain things aren't, there's no getting away from it. You are drawing a line there, and you're in some way, maybe more so in others, inhibiting free speech. Creating a safe space for a certain group or for a certain amount of people in somebody else's interests insinuates that that group is weak. It insinuates that group is incapable of being open to the ideas that you or other people are. And I think people who celebrate safe spaces, the NUS and SU, quite a lot of SUs across the UK, as we found in our research for the FSUR, are asserting the fact that minority groups, such as people who are often on the end of it are women, or LGBT groups or ethnic minorities, that something about them makes them less capable of dealing with offensive ideas or offensive views than other people, than white straight men. And I think that's the absolute antithesis of equality. You can, by saying that some people are less able than others, that's got nothing to do with equality at all. So I really want to shoot down this idea that it's about making more equal space. Of course, as Naomi said, this hasn't just dropped out of the sky. It did start, it started in the 70s as something that was actually something quite physical. It was a space that a certain building or a certain room on campus that would be used still, I think, negatively to say that this is where we'll go when we feel vulnerable. But this has been completely spread now to almost act as a kind of aura across universities, that there is no designated safe space. Your entire university experience has to be safe. And I think that says something for the kind of far-reaching and all-encompassing nature of these policies. And it's not just, I mean, lots of policies, not just in the university, but in jobs and across wider society, have lists of speech that aren't that shouldn't be allowed, such as racist or homophobic or sexist views. But actually, these safe space policies are much more bizarre. For example, Manchester Students' Union doesn't allow discriminating language. Edinburgh Student Union doesn't like laughing. And Nottingham Students' Union warns students against being careless. And I just think this is the kind of shocking level of far-reaching and all-encompassing censorship that can be applied to really anything that the people in charge, SU officers or the NUS, can pick that they don't like. This has come from a wider sense in society that certain people aren't able for things. For example, as women, we fought and feminists fought back in the 60s and 70s, and before then too, that women were as equal and able to be out in the public world, in the hustle and bustle of public life, and deal with everything that a man could. Safe spaces absolutely deny that, and they're completely reactionary in that way, because they say that we should literally be shut back into the safe home of the universities in places strewn with beanbags and comfortable seating areas. So I think that if you want to be taken seriously as a free-thinking adult, and if you value yourself as being able to stand up and be counted as much as anybody else, which is what I think we should all assert more in the kind of censorious climate on campus today, you must laugh at, shout in, and offend safe spaces as much as possible, because otherwise we're just giving up our freedom.
Thank you very much. And Abby.
Okay, first of all, I think we're conflating a lot of very different things here. I've not read the Edinburgh or the Nottingham kind of full safe space descriptions, but I'm fairly certain nobody's stopping students in Edinburgh laughing, and my brother's at Nottingham University, and definitely no one ever prevented him being careless. So I think sort of like agonising over the words and interpreting them in the most draconian way is not a very helpful way to approach the issue. It also troubles me that people have conflated kind of casual sexual assault, racist abuse directed at individuals with the expression of ideas. I'm very much believe that anyone should be able to express any ideas. I'm not here to argue for an anti-free speech argument, a suppression of ideas argument. What I do think is that the kind of the rows that generate most attention and that can most plausibly be seen as free speech issues, which is no platforming of speakers, generally don't actually end up shutting down debate at all. They do exactly the opposite. What happens is a students' union officer decides they don't want to let a affiliated society invite a certain, often high-profile speaker. there's an enormous backlash. A lot of people are very angry. There's a lot of media attention. Commentators write about it. Probably the person who's ostensibly being denied a platform writes a comment-free article. They might go on TV. Spiked will write something on it. People talk about it on Twitter to the point that it gets utterly boring. And yeah, it's basically the idea that the debate has been shut down just isn't true. I imagine a lot of people are probably thinking that's all well and good, but it's not really the point. Normally when we talk about no platform, we're talking about kind of the university as a separate space. So it doesn't matter what the wider debate is. It's the fact that that debate's not being allowed on campus. I think that's really artificial, to be quite honest. We live in a massively connected society. These things do generate loads of attention. And basically, even if student union officers want to stop students hearing an opinion, they just can't. I think it's also a mistake to think that's what they're trying to do, though. Basically, this has been happening. This has happened a lot of times now. Surely any student union officer considering no platforming someone has to know the likely result is strike sound effect, loads of coverage, more attention to the opinions they're trying to shut down. I think often they do know that. The thing is, often they believe that they're sort of like standing up for some kind of marginalised group, whether you agree with them or not. That's generally the goal. Whether it's trans people, student sex workers, they're two common recent examples. And the views they advocate are often ones that aren't actually as mainstream, don't receive as much general attention, people aren't as aware of. And what happens when they do no platform someone is they start a discussion in the mainstream media, kind of outside of university campuses and the kind of pockets of social media where people normally share these views. And if anything, it starts a debate, not shuts it down. I think the other thing that's important to remember is just how limited the effect on university campuses actually is when this happens. To take Jamingre, for example, Cardiff University didn't actually succeed in, I think as a women's officer, didn't succeed in no platforming her. But even if she had, then lecturers would still be able to teach her. First years could be told they have to read her as part of their core reading. Her books will still be in libraries. Students still could talk about it. The idea that a student union officer using the really quite limited amount of power they have to prevent a particular event taking place shuts down free speech just seems absurd to me. It's at most a symbolic gesture, and I basically just think the whole row is an enormous storm in a teacup.
Thank you all very much. As you've all kept immaculately to time, if not a little bit underneath, I think I'll pose a couple of questions to you each just to tease out some of these differences very quickly before we bring it out to the audience. There's some really interesting stuff on the table there. Naomi, you spoke a little bit about the kind of hypocrisies of safe spaces to some extent, or the double standards. Some people are allowed within them, are not. Is that not an argument, therefore, for just including more people in the safe space? If, for instance, Jewish or pro-Israel students feel slighted, is it not the case that it should be extended so that everyone can feel comfortable? I mean, what do you make of that argument? Because there seems to be an appetite for that amongst certain sections of Israel societies at the moment.
No, I don't think that would be useful because it's already been proved not to work. I mean, supposedly no one is supposed to be discriminated against in a safe space. So I would assume that would automatically include Jewish students or pro-Israel students, but it doesn't. And I don't think in any case that helps the situation because the issue mostly surrounding pro-Israel politics on campus is that there isn't open debate, and I don't think a safe space policy, which is censorious really in nature, can help anyone have a fully open and free debate.
Definitely. And Siobhan, you were talking about how while certain safe spaces have their use, there's a case that they're kind of now eating themselves and they're actually becoming to some extent censorious. But I suppose the question is there not is that not a danger of just conceding the principle on safe spaces in general? If you allow the idea to exist that certain people are just too vulnerable, need to be protected to some extent, is it not natural that that's going to spread and you're going to get it getting worse and worse and it starting to eat itself in that way?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. I think the biggest issue is that, well, most people would agree that safety is important. Safety means different things to different people. So what Naomi was discussing about how maybe Jewish students will maybe have a very different idea of safety than compared to what particularly needs feminists will see themselves as having. And I think that if we get, you can sort of exhaust the idea to the extent that just, you know, it's almost like this Oprah Winfrey style gift where like everyone gets a free space and then there's just safety for everyone, but it doesn't actually mean anything. But I do think the fundamental idea that people shouldn't be mocked and harassed and unduly sort of, not criticised, but really, I think that particularly with feminist groups that women are talking about particularly traumatic experiences and people are mocking them and deriding them, I think that is a very important issue with safety. There are obviously people who would say that there are other forms of safety and you don't want to have a kind of hierarchy there of different competing ones, but I think there are definitely core things which are very important to protect, but quite how you define safety and what it means to different people is where I think safe spaces start to kind of unravel slightly. There.
Excellent. And Ella, to put some of Abby's points to you really, insofar as are we just getting too overexcited over nothing? I mean, insofar as, you know, you have national newspaper columnists being no-platformed, saying that their free speech is restricted and then complaining about their free speech being restricted in a national newspaper, for instance. Is it the case that we are blowing this all out of proportion? These debates are taking place. It's just that these students have a right to protest. What do you make of that argument?
I think there's a difference between having the right to protest and stopping others from speaking. And the whole point of, I think the idea that we encourage debate by stopping some by having a safe space and stopping them from airing their views on campus is just the kind of bizarre logic behind safe spaces. If you say to me that I can air my views on this side of the room but not that side of the room, that doesn't give me freedom. It's a quite obvious restriction of my freedom. In order to allow students to have all options available to them, there has to be free speech on campus. And quite frankly, if you feel safe at university, you're absolutely doing something wrong.
And there you go. And Abby, what's your response to that then?
I think that students should be have the right to air their opinions on campus. It's not clear to me that Germaine Greer has some kind of right to air a particular opinion on a particular university campus. Basically, I think it's always a form of protest. It's always targeting someone high profile whose opinions are known because they're widespread, and it's generally students believing they're standing up for people who don't have the same opportunity to be heard, and no platforming is sort of a symbolic gesture that allows this alternative perspective to be heard when it wouldn't normally. It's just, I just don't think there's any point talking about what hypothetically could happen rather than just what actually happens. And I think actually when student union officers decide to no platform people, they're fully aware of the context as well.
Okay, excellent. Sorry, do you want to come back?
Yeah, well, with safe spaces, the whole point is that it's all in the hypothetical. It's about and with what happened at Manchester with Germaine Greer, it was that hypothetically her presence on campus would endanger students, and there's a completely hypothetical statement that this would possibly happen, and so I don't really understand how that's about, I think unpick that basically.
I think the sort of danger is a word that people who oppose this stuff get really stuck on. How can this be dangerous? It's just words. I sort of don't want to, they oppose it because they think that trans students, they think they're basically not showing solidarity and support with the minority of trans students who are more likely to, be shouted at on the street, be ostracised, generally be, have a bad time on campus and in the wider world. The student union officer feels that if they use university resources to sort of provide a platform to this person who says what they consider hateful things about trans people, who's already got an enormous platform, they're taking a side. They see it as like an imbalanced debate, and they're taking one side or the other. And I do think it's important to remember that no matter what happens, no one is stopping Germaine Greer saying what Germaine Greer wants to say, and loads of people listening. That's just not actually what's happening, and I think that's relevant.
Can I?
Yeah, sure.
I think the problem with that is that you've made this huge assumption that all the trans students on campus don't want to hear Germaine Greer speak, and that may not be the case. Some of them may want to go and hear her speak.
I'm not making an assumption. I'm not saying that I would no platform Germaine Greer, that I think any of these individual. I'm not saying I think this person, any particular people make a wrong or right call. I'm saying that we have to look at what they're actually doing, what the actual goals are, and what actually happens. The point of it isn't to stop people with Germaine Greer's opinions being heard. What is
we'll get to get to questions in one moment. But first of all, we'll see if Siobhan's got any responses to anything, and then we'll move back to the floor. Siobhan, is there anything you want to respond to?
So I think I think on the point of Germaine Greer, and I personally would disagree with platforming by support people's right to no platform people, but I wouldn't do it myself. I think that it slightly touches on what Ella was saying, she would say that the opposite, that people are kind of implying to students, it's sort of infantilizing students by saying that they can't think for themselves. And it's like that actually, the kind of fore about Germaine Greer sort of does that in itself, because it's implying that students, unless you literally bring Germaine Greer in front of you and she kind of says some words to you, you can't find out what she says or what she thinks. And that actually infantilizes students, because it's saying that unless your students' union specifically brings every single person in the world in front of you, you won't engage with their ideas. I think because students are able to think for themselves, you can go and get any of Germaine Greer's books that you want, so you can find lots of her interviews on Newsnight, or all over YouTube, that her ideas are very much out there, and that ironically it is infantilizing students to kind of say that people can't think for themselves and access their own sort of engagement with different issues and debates unless the students' union specifically brings the person in to talk to them.
Excellent. So lots on the table there. So at this point, we'll throw it out to you guys. So stick your hands up. I'm going to take batches of about 4 or 5 questions and then bring them back to the panel. And I think we have some mics going around as well. So there's a gentleman down the front here and then one there.
Thanks. It's just an observation to relate to Tom's point at the beginning about the history of some of this stuff. One thing that does occur to me, it might be worth thinking about the difference between refuges and safe spaces. So as a child, I grew up around the Chiswick Women's Aid Refuge, which was for battered wives. And that had a sort of safe space policy in the sense that men weren't allowed to go into the building. But it's interesting to think about the differences there. One of the differences to me seems to be that was a reactive thing. Women had been beaten, and the space was there to protect them and their children. So, whereas the safe space seems to presume a threat rather than react to an actual threat. And also the definition of harm. So these were women who had been physically abused by their husbands. And there seems to be a shift in the debate in terms of the definition of harm to one of protection of identity rather than the physical person.
Thank you very much. And we had another question over here.
Yes, for Ella. I think you really hit the nail on the head with people who want to help minorities are the ones that actually keep them in a little box. So I'm totally with you on that level. How much of this is related to money? And what I'll say is, back when I lived in California, they hired something called a vice chancellor of diversity at $200,000 a year in Berkeley, California. So are these just made up jobs that people have? And if the illusion is shattered, will a lot of people be out of work? That's my cynicism there, but just...
Thank you very much. And we've got another question just back there. There's a lady there in the glasses.
Yeah, safe spaces. If you're in international relations at the moment, we're very concerned about a PhD student at Cambridge who was tortured to death while conducting research in Egypt. If we want to defend safety, the safety of students, let's get real and let's start defending the pursuit of knowledge and truth. And for me, this really terrible thing about this safe spaces arguments is that dictators love all the suggestions that are coming forward about limiting speech and making us feel, not raising certain issues that might jeopardize people's feelings. Similarly, in India, you've got students at the moment facing charges of sedition because they want to raise controversial political ideas. I think there should be a lot more about defending the pursuit of knowledge so we don't have cases like PhD students tortured to death because of their pursuit of the truth, because of the pursuit of knowledge.
Thank you very much. Any more for any more? Yeah, we've got one down here, and then I'll take the gentleman in front.
Just from a slightly more aged point of view, those of us here who pay taxes, we pay taxes to universities to produce the leaders of tomorrow, to sort out the country. We need people who are well-trained, and we're not getting value for money at the moment, producing these drooling idiots who are supposed to look after us when we are drooling idiots. How are you going to deliver us value for money of properly educated, not schooled or trained, but educated individuals when they're stopped from thinking?
Thank you very much. And if you pass it back directly behind you.
Yeah, I just wanted you to answer the question, who do you think owns the campus? Because we're talking about allowing a very, very tiny minority of people here to set regulations on all students and staff, as it happens. I teach American students in the Midwest who live on very small campuses. And I was very surprised recently. They're usually very unpolitical. And they spontaneously raised in a seminar I was running over here the fact that seminars there and lectures are routinely disrupted by students doing exactly this, where they're saying, you can't use that word, you mustn't use that word, I'm offended. And this becomes just part of the everyday life of the university. Now that norm becomes established through student politics. And so that's why it matters, because this absolutely gets in the way of education. I think you can't, wriggle your way around it and say, well, it doesn't really happen, or it doesn't really stop free speech, because the principle is the important thing here, surely.
Thank you. So I'm going to take one more, and I'll bring it back to the panel. Gentleman just down the front left.
Hi there. As someone that was a student very recently, I find it very frustrating when people say on my behalf that Germaine Deer doesn't have a right to speak, or it doesn't matter, you can go read her books or what she has to say in the newspaper. The fact is, I went to university and I consider it one of the most pressing and interesting questions of our time, how socially constructed gender, biological sex and sexuality interact. It's a really complex and fascinating question. It doesn't matter, the only place I could discuss that question was in hushed tones at the end of corridors or in my home. It really doesn't matter if you don't think she can speak. It's not about Germaine Deer. It's about this central, really, really, really interesting question that only one side of that debate is being heard in campuses, and we're all paying money to be on campuses, whatever side. Even if we held a minority view on that, we should be allowed to voice it. And the same goes for many other topics. It's not about Germaine Deer, and it's not about reading her views in books. It's about discussing them with my peers on campus. I'm not allowed to do that.
Thank you very much. So lots there. We've got the refuges versus safe spaces, the question of money. Are we doing away with the pursuit of truth? Are we wasting this gentleman's tax money? Who owns the campus? Is this offensive to students? So lots to come back on there. So panellists, I'll give you a couple of minutes each. Just feel free to respond to one, maybe two questions of things that have been brought up. So Abby, do you want to go first?
Well, I think that one was obviously directed at me. If you aren't, and the lady as well, if students aren't allowed to discuss these issues in seminars and classroom discussions, all with their peers, you know, sitting in the student union in case that I overheard. I fully agree with you, that's, you know, that's terrible. I've just not seen any evidence of it. I left university a few years ago. Things might have changed, but I did quite a lot on the sociology of sexuality. I had a lot of classroom discussions about trans politics, a lot of classroom discussions about sex work. And it's just not, even talking to current students, it just wasn't my impression that these are kind of off limits for academic discussion. I think that the opinions that are being put forward by the people who want to no platform people like Germaine Greer are still minority opinions. I think that's why they're using no platforming as a tactic, because they're desperately trying to be heard. I've not personally seen evidence that people are running universities, that there's a majority who have different opinions who are being suppressed. I think if the people doing the no platforming represented majority opinions, and the opinions they were trying to suppress represented minority opinions, that would be a completely different dynamic. But I just don't think that's what's happening.
And thanks. And Naomi, do you want to respond to anything you've heard?
Yeah, sure. So I think with regards to the question who runs the campus, obviously the student unions are the ones who are installing all these kind of censorious rules. But I think it is worth remembering that probably the majority of students don't even know what their campus policies are. They're probably just, you know, going to classes, enjoying student life. I think there's this small but vocal minority who have decided that they're speaking for everyone with these rules. And whilst it's good to know that there are students speaking out against it, I mean, we've seen the Freedom of Speech Society set up recently at one of the London universities, and probably the majority of students wouldn't agree with the policies if they knew them all. But it is still worrying because they managed to shut down debates. We saw it with all these no platform policies. So it is worrying, and it really does need more students from the majority, I think, to sort of speak up against them.
Thank you very much. And Siobhan, what's your thoughts?
So I'll just touch on this gentleman's concerns about his taxes and where his tax money is going. And Martin, thinking your question sort of that if people are being stopped from thinking they're not really getting a proper, thorough, rigorous education, if people are kind of having their thought stifled. And I think that actually it would be very much the opposite of that if you sort of point out to someone that actually maybe there are like other genders than kind of male and female, and you're introducing this new idea, and it's kind of really blows people's mind, and then they say you're not, they don't discuss it, they don't want to think about it, but then also say that they are in favour of free speech and challenging and engaging with ideas and different thoughts. I find that a lot of the discussions, part of the like free speech campaigns, actually do the opposite because they refuse to acknowledge transphobia, really engage with these sorts of debates and issues. They don't particularly want to talk about violence against women. Because they just sort of say, no, it's sort of shutting off. And so, ironically, it's, lots of those people who are refusing to engage in ideas and have proper discussions. I find it's the same thing, for instance, with trigger warnings. People say that's kind of mollycoddling people and being oversensitive, when actually I would say it's the opposite. It's kind of pointing out that for lots of people, the discussions you're engaging with in academia actually relate to their real lives, and they will have been victims of that. And it's the free speech people who can't cope with that idea. So I think that, it's actually... people are engaging with lots of very complicated political and philosophical and social ideas with these discussions, and it's not really shutting people off at all. I think there's lots of rigorous debate about them and how they arrive at those policies.
Thanks. And Ella.
The difference between having a physical space in which, and some of the first safe spaces were set up as centres for victims of domestic abuse or other or people who are actually under real threat from violence in struggles for freedom back then. But this, I think the important point to make is what Tom made earlier, is that this kind of having a site where vulnerability can be almost celebrated is going to and has naturally spread into this idea that the entirety of campus is a safe space. I think it's very important to assert that campuses are not kind of these private members clubs, and so they shouldn't be. University is part of public life, and so therefore it seems to me completely ridiculous that you would be able to kind of draw a mythical line at the gates of where free thought stopped and where it was allowed. SUs, especially in the UK, student engagement in SU votes and things like that is really low. I mean, it's just not the case that we can argue that they're democratically representing students, because, as Naomi said, the majority of students just really don't care and get on with their lives regardless. But despite that, we really have to make the case very strongly that these safe spaces be overturned, because the difference between a safe space and a no platform, because they are different, is that a safe space absolutely denies you even bringing up the question. Not only does it say you can't make this offensive argument, it says you can't even ask a question about it because you might trigger someone or you might offend someone in the process of bringing up the idea. So it's actually far more reaching than a no platform policy. I think the most important thing here to remember is that a university is primarily a place where the ideas of tomorrow are discussed and debated, and it's about, like the lady in the audience said, the pursuit of knowledge. This can't happen if certain views are restricted.
Excellent. So we're going to go back out for more questions, because I can see some hands already going up. Wow. So let's go for, there's a lady in the back left corner, just there, and then we'll move forward.
I wanted to make a comment on what's changed and what hasn't. And I think one thing that definitely hasn't changed is that if you're a university student who wants to do something that's in the slightest bit worthwhile in your time at university, you're going to run into the NUS and have a massive great ding-dong with them. That has always been the case. The NUS has always constituted a blot on the lives and future of any student who wants to make anything different, make a difference to anything and do anything progressive. I was banned by mine back in 1988. So if you think getting banned for saying things that the NUS doesn't like is new, it really isn't. It's what they've always done. The thing that strikes me as different now, though, is the degree to which student union bureaucrats are prepared to assert their authority over the very lifeblood of campus life, which is the educational experience. And that's what's really changed. Because when I was a student, the people that they wanted to ban were people like me who were saying things about the world out there, how you should campaign and how you should fight for something different, and they hated it. They hated people who disagreed with the Labour Party, they hated people who disagreed with their tactics, and they would ban you if you took them up on it. That's what happened. Now, NUS bureaucrats and the NUS has become so insular and so narrow-minded, it's turned its back even on that. And what it's now doing is turning its face toward the internal life of universities, what students do, what they say, and how they live on campus. So it's even worse. In that sense, it's even worse. And I really think that, therefore, there is a lot at stake here for any student who even wants an education, never mind wants to get involved in politics more widely.
Thank you. Right, we've got another question just down here.
Going back a few steps to the kind of the taxpayer and, you know, possibly feeling like you're not getting your money's worth, I feel like maybe there's an underestimation here that if you are a student and you do disagree with like safe platforms and a platform being taken away from someone, there's an underestimation that you also have a platform behind you. If you disagree, there's an entire student body behind you that could disagree with you as well. Whereas I think in the outside world, like David Cameron passed a bill in May of 2015 that's anti-terrorism, and he put in it to stop hate speech and to promote certain values in the UK. If you disagree with something outside of university, where's your platform? You have to build your own. Within university, if you disagree, or you disagree with a platform being taken away, at least you have the student body behind you to support you. And I think that maybe is a slight underestimation in that the search for knowledge is backed by more people than if you were on your own outside of uni.
Interesting, thank you. I'm going to go over to this side where I've been neglecting a little bit. If we come down the front, there's a gentleman in the front row, and then we'll go back.
So like, I'm really glad that sort of Siobhan, I think, brought up like the role of like different capabilities, like autism, for example, because it's very well, Ella, say sort of, you know, from your spiked keyboard warrior safe space, that everyone has like equal capabilities, but you know, a lot of people don't. And you know, as someone who was autistic myself, I went through a little bit of this safe space thing, and it was a stepping stone to then engage in, you know, real debate. You know, I'm glad that bad opinions aren't censored because all my opinions are bad. But like, you know, is there any role for a safe space if it doesn't have the censorious element to act as a stepping stone to engage in, you know, the debate that you are privileged to be in?
Thank you. And there was another one 2 rows behind him.
Thank you. So on Manchester Uni, we recently invited Julie Bindel and Milo Yiannopoulos. And so the safe space, the vague wording of safe space, was used to kind of ban these speakers. And the question isn't really, for us at least, who invited them, wasn't about, well, do these have a right to speak? It was more about, are we allowed to listen, right? Are we allowed to listen to the people we'd like to do? And it's not that we want to do this on, you know, in the middle of the street. We want to have an event, in a ticketed event, where you had to go to a specific location and show your ticket and register beforehand. And why should, where is, I mean, yeah, I fail to see the harm in us having such a secluded event. Why aren't we allowed to listen? I think that's the question for students.
Thank you. And 3 rows back there.
There's a whole lot of question begging going on in the wording of some of these policies. What we really need to ask is whether a particular instance of speech is hate speech, is transphobic, is racism, is Islamophobic. And all of these, the wording that, you know, this particular kind of speech is racist or whatever, assumes what it needs to prove. And the only way that we can get down to proving that that is an instance of that kind of speech is to have the argument. I myself am trans, I'm lesbian, and I'm feminist, and I thank God that when I was at uni, we weren't protected and coddled in this way, because it made us think. It made us actually formulate arguments instead of stewing in our own victimhood.
There we go. And where have we? There we go. Just in the back corner there.
Hi, I just wanted to pick up on something that Abby said in her opening remarks. You made this distinction between, you said, well, I'm not trying to shut down free speech because I don't want to shut down ideas. What I want to do is prevent racist hate speech. Now, the problem with that attempted distinction is that even if you think it's the job of student unions to regulate this kind of thing, many of us really don't, even if you do for the sake of argument, the race for ever more, the race to sort of attain ever greater political scruples among the student union crowd leads to the ever-lowering of the bar, where we get ridiculous examples like most recently Peter Tatchell making it onto the blacklist as a racist and a transphobe because he once signed a letter saying maybe we should listen to people who have a different idea about gender. That's just sort of nakedly absurd. Peter Tatchell, of all people, come on.
Thank you very much. So on that note, we'll bring it back to the panel. Let's start with Ella, our resident keyboard warrior, if there's anything you want to respond to.
I think it needs to be said that, and though there are many shy people or people who can't, who think that they can't handle offensive opinions or handle having a bit of a Barney, there's only one thing to say, and that's if you're going to be political and you're going to get into politics, you've got to have a hard neck and you've got to toughen up. And I think that's really not a controversial thing to say to students. If you don't like something, you have to kind of stand up for what you believe in and argue against it. There's no way of winning the debate if you don't have it. And I think saying that we need these safe spaces in order to foster a kind of, a confidence in people is just false, because what you're saying is, let's protect you in order so that you can grow stronger, when the only way you grow stronger is through experience and pretty much by toughening up.
So, Abby, should we just toughen up?
Okay, so the gentleman at the back, I I understand what you're saying about who defines what's racist, who defines what's transphobic, who defines what's sexist. When I was drawing a distinction, it was more between sort of, I felt like people were conflating outright harassment aimed at individuals that made no substantive points. It was basically just insults with ideas. I wasn't saying that I have complete faith in student union officers to draw the boundaries of acceptable and unacceptable speech, because I don't. I disagree with them probably more than a lot of you might assume I do. But that's not what my argument's about. To the lady who was talking about, who said she was glad that there was, I guess you're saying that debate around trans issues was allowed to happen at your university or just in the past generally. I think what the no platforming debate has done in some ways is actually moved that debate from university campuses into the mainstream media and made it something that people are talking about, just not in an academic context, just not on Tumblr, just, around the kitchen table and stuff. I think that's what no platforming is. I think it's a protest gesture designed to attract attention and get the conversation going, really.
Thank you. And Siobhan, what are your thoughts on this? Particularly this idea that by effectively protesting or no platforming people, you're actually enhancing free speech or you're bringing forward a conversation. Do you buy that?
I'm not sure. I definitely think that no platforming simply doesn't work. I think we find that almost in every single occasion when someone's no platform, then there's this sort of massive media storm about the fact that it's happened. And then in many ways, that person who's just been no platform, they're now having this huge platform because they will get to write a column for the Telegraph and probably for the Spectator blogs, and then they'll be interviewed on Newsnight. So I think for NUS people who, I don't doubt that they're very well intentioned, but that when they no platform people, that's almost the best way possible to make sure that person ends up in the press and their ideas get much more coverage than they would have otherwise. But I think that in many ways is, again, one of the biggest issues I have about free speech debates is that they're often used to derail issues, to make it seem like you're engaging with an issue when you're not. So for instance, with Jermaine Greer, that we've mentioned here several times tonight, no one's really actually discussed what her ideas were about, and instead it's about essentially, it was a way of looking like you're engaging with a trans rights issue, but making it about cis or non-trans people's rights issue, because that's what it's about. And the same with Dapper Laughs, free speech, that became violence against women became a men's rights issue because it was men's rights, probably men's rights, to make jokes about violence against women. And so I do find that a lot of this free speech debate, it's a way of looking like you're engaging with the issue whilst not actually engaging with the issue. I think partly because people are afraid of really engaging with these ideas. I think that is something that we do need to watch out for, but definitely because we see that with no platforming, the actual issues themselves are very seldom discussed, and the person who was deemed offensive gets a much bigger platform than they would have had anyway.
Thank you. And Naomi, what are your thoughts?
Well, I wanted to respond to, I think it was someone over there who talked about the NUS becoming very internal. And I think that's right, and I think safe space policies are an example of that, because it's all about looking at how each student feels, and it's all about, offence and how you feel if someone says this or this person speaks. It's all about you feeling things, and I think it puts a lot of other more important things at stake, like freedom of speech, and that's the problem. It suddenly seemed so important if someone's feelings have been hurt that you're going to stop a speaker that other people might want to hear coming to a campus. And it's very censorious. And I think to come back to the no platform issue and people saying that, it doesn't work, they still get a platform, they're still in national newspapers. Okay, yes, it's not successful in stopping that person from speaking, but it does remove a freedom from people who want to go to that particular talk. So you are talking about limiting freedoms, you're talking about censoring someone, saying they're not allowed to come and say something that you disagree with. So it's not good enough to just say, well, they don't work really.
Excellent. Right. So I'm going to go out again to the audience, possibly for the final time. So I'm going to get in as many as possible, so stick your hands really high. I see there's a lot of shy students in the room, so get stuck in. Everyone else, I love you, but you're far too old. So if anyone, now is your chance. So going from, there's a gentleman at the back sticking his hand up.
Hello. I'm not really sure what side of the debate I'm on, but Ella, in your first speech, you sort of seemed to imply there should be absolutely no safe spaces on campus. But I mean, by that logic, hypothetically, should like an anti-abortion protest have the right to follow a student into their halls? I mean, and if no, what's the difference between that and a safe space? And I think it's a nice ideal of a student you have, just, you know, a debating machine that's ready to give a speech at the drop of a hat. But I mean, surely we all need some time out of the arena.
Thank you. Yeah, perfect. Gentleman right next to you. On the left. On your left, Viv. No. We'll take you both. Why not?
Hi. I was just wondering what role you thought the increased tuition fees had to play in this debate, because as a student, it's really, really common to come out of a lecture or something and be like, oh, it was really boring, and be like, oh, I paid like 80 quid for that. And it kind of, I think the increased tuition fees has kind of bred this feeling of their students are buying a product, and education is no longer this kind of intellectual debate that you can, it's kind of flexible. It's something that you're paying money for and you're getting in return, and not just education, but the whole kind of university experience. So, I mean, I'm definitely against safe spaces, etc. But I think it's understandable that students think they're paying so much money and they want to kind of feel happy and comfortable in return for that. And I don't think the students are necessarily the problem, but I feel like maybe the really increased tuition fees are the problem. And do you think that this is going to go away while students are paying so much money? Thanks.
Thank you. And gentleman just next to you.
Okay. My question is for the entire panel. It seems to me that there's actually two debates going on here. There's kind of a debate inside of the debate. The first debate is the free speech debate about safe spaces. The second debate is actually a debate about equality, which I'd like people on the panel, if possible, to say more about. It seems that the proponent of safe spaces has a vision of equality, where they want equality in the future. So they think that there's all this inequality and injustice in the present, and the way that you get rid of that is you redistribute power to people that are vulnerable. You do that through having different etiquettes for different groups of people. And that's what safe spaces seem like an expression of. Whereas it seems like for the opponent of safe spaces, you want equality now. You want a universal etiquette for everyone in a public space. You don't want a different etiquette, say, for black people or trans people or women or whatever. So my question for the panel is, why is it so difficult for people at universities today to argue for and be passionate about and even be activist about equality in the present compared to equality in the future?
Thank you very much. And let's see some hands again. This gentleman just next to you there.
Can I just say that was kind of really expressed what I was going to say a bit better than me, really. But just kind of, I think maybe it's interesting, we talked about lad culture. I think you said something about a commitment to challenging lad culture. So maybe it's almost as if you don't want, it's almost as if safe spaces and no platforming is to do with not feeding lad culture or somehow starving the strident cis male agenda in order to kind of starve them, in order to kind of empower the minorities, in order to achieve some kind of equality or balance. So I think perhaps is there something in that in terms of, are they trying to starve a certain perceived agenda in order to raise up supposed minorities?
Thank you very much. Let's shoot back over to this side, I think. There, have we got a mic? Yep, so just that lady in the middle there.
Hi, yes, a quick question. Do you think, this probably relates to what all these young lads have said there, is there a difference between a safe space as a policy and a safe space as an actual place? You know, is there like a safe space in university, which is a place, or a group? You know, I'm all for safe spaces with a group. You know, all kinky clubs should be allowed at university. So is there like a difference, or is it like safe space as policy? All groups need to adopt a safe space policy. So there might be a confusion about these two ideas, and there might be a bit of a difference.
Thank you. And where are we? If we come down the front, we've got a cluster of three just there. So we'll go with the guy in the front row first.
Question for Abby. Firstly, thank you very much for coming into the proverbial lion's den and being willing to sort of talk to people who mostly disagree with you. My question is, safe spaces these days tend to be built on a discourse of privilege and identity, which necessarily paints certain kinds of speech and certain kinds of comments, etc., as necessarily harmful and being, in a way, acts of violence. How on earth can that be compatible with loyalty to free speech?
Thank you. And directly behind you.
Hi, Abby, I take your point that, you know, speakers who are no platformed are going to then go on to get a bigger platform, but I think it is about the students who wanted to hear from them, and I think it's not a safe space for them if they're not allowed to have their discussions. And I wonder, you know, also I think, you know, that boy over there gave you the evidence. He said that he was not able to have his free speech, and then you said, where's the evidence? There he is. And I wonder what you think the outcome will be. At the very least, people are going to not have a positive experience at university, and potentially I think that it could breed actual hostility and hate in people that have had fairly innocuous views silenced.
Thank you very much. Let's see some more hands. So yeah, just pass back to the gentleman behind you.
Hi. I'm surprised it hasn't been explicitly discussed yet, because for me personally, the vast majority of my interactions with safe spaces has been online in sort of Facebook groups and things like that. Especially Country Living, which is in Oxford, I'm sure probably many of you are aware of. My question was, considering the sort of insular nature of these groups and the fact that it often sort of rotates around self-affirmation and self-gratification within the group itself, if we're going to go with the point of view that safe spaces are generally sort of something that needs to be tackled, how would you deal with these? And potentially, is there any way of dealing with them because they're so sort of insular and self-propelling? Thanks.
Thank you. And just pass behind you there.
Even if you, I'm sort of agnostic about whether or not to invite someone like Nick Griffin or someone like that. But even if you take it that it's a good idea to ban like bona fide racists like that, I think that it's all with the modern left in charge of student unions and stuff. There always going to be a sense of mission creep because they're really susceptible to calling, slapping labels like racist if you want restricted immigration or like Milo Yiannopoulos was called a misogynist when he's a staunch critic of modern feminism, but I don't think anyone could reasonably call him a misogynist and an Islamophobe if you think that the West is under threat from Islamism, and officer could go on.
Thank you. And I'm going to throw it back to we grab the mic and then take it. There's a cluster of 3 questions.
There seems to be an unspoken assumption amongst the members of the panel that rational debate not only is it good in itself, which I agree, but also that it will go the way they assume or seem to assume that it will go. In reality, some positions can be actually debated in a rational way, but it may actually be quite difficult to, take, for example, there are people who claim that 9/11 never happened, and they have an impressive array of arguments. There are people who claim that there were never gas chambers in Auschwitz, and they have plenty of arguments. Now, how are you going to make sure that those positions do not lead to undesirable consequences?
Thank you very much. And there's 3 just in that row there, so we'll grab those and then we'll come back to the panel. Oh, if you want to pass that along the row.
I just want to reiterate what's been said from the floor about this kind of, I just find it really bonkers, this suggestion that no platforming is good for free speech. I kind of understand, Abby, that it may kind of provoke outrage on social media, but bashing out 140 characters on Twitter isn't the same as engaging kind of professional speaking in a debate in a hall like this. And just one other thing is that in the kind of your beginning speech, you suggested that it's quite good for student unions to no platform certain individuals because it sends out a good message that we're against what they say. I'm at UCL, where last year in about November, our student union decided to, or attempted to, platform this great guy who kind of gave up his job in the city. He's called Massa Gifford. Then went and fought with the Kurds against ISIS. My union tried to ban him from speaking because, I quote here, one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. This is a bloke who fought ISIS, for God's sake. He's not a terrorist. And I kind of agree that, fair enough, it may send out a message to the public. But this message is always wrong.
Thank you very much. On that note, I'm sorry for those I've missed out, but I'm going to have to leave it there so we can bring it back to the panel. So panel, feel free to respond to anything you've heard or just offer a final thought. You've got the princely amount of time of a minute each. So, so we'll start with Siobhan, and if you want to offer us your final thoughts.
1 minute.
Yes.
Okay, I'll try and be brief then. And I know this is going to be a controversial opinion for this audience, but in the spirit of free speech, I think that what I've noticed over the course of this discussion of the last hour or so is maybe what a lot of free speech people complain about how feminists and other LGBT rights groups have this kind of victim mentality. I think that's something that we find a lot within the free speech brigade, as it were, that people sort of see themselves as massive victims, and if they don't get the opportunity to say literally every single bad thought that's ever come into their head, and hundreds of people get to hear it, then they're like they're a victim and they're being oppressed. And I think that actually reiterates and parrots a lot of the complaints they actually have about the groups that they're trying to critique. So it's something that I think is growing massively, starting free speech debates, that people are really growing in this sort of victim mentality, and it's becoming quite insular in itself. And I think, that's quite ironic, given a lot of the criticisms they would use of the other groups, which they themselves would say they're against. So that's my 1 minute thought.
Thanks, Naomi. And Naomi.
I wanted to respond to the gentleman who talked about people that want to talk about Holocaust denial or saying 9/11 didn't happen. How do you deal with that? Well, with the truth. You go there with arguments, and you debate it, and you can't guarantee that you're going to convince everyone, but that is the nature of freedom of speech, and it's up to every individual to think about things, think about arguments, and decide for themselves. And finally, to come to, I think someone was mentioning, students pay all this money to go to university. Shouldn't they have, be assured they're going to be in a safe, comfortable place? Well, you can also look at it from the other side, in that if you're paying all that money, shouldn't you have your mind broadened? Shouldn't you be challenged with new ideas? How else are you going to learn anything new from a university education? And you can't do that in a safe space where speech is limited and ideas and thoughts are restrained.
Thank you. And Abby, your final thoughts.
Okay, first of all, to the guy at the back, I wasn't saying that I think students are always signalling, trying to send the right signal. I've been really careful to try and not express an opinion on whether I think they're right or wrong in any particular case. I was talking about what I think the goal of no platforming is in a context when it does provoke conversation. I think the main difference between my perspective and the perspective of most people who've challenged me is, I guess I see there being a intrinsic value in some of these debates reaching an audience beyond universities. So in my head, I'm always, I'm prioritising these conversations taking place on, a national scale, things that aren't normally heard outside of universities, outside of Tumblr and Twitter, getting heard by more people. If your focus is on the right, exclusive right of the individual student to participate in as many debates in universities as possible, I accept that the idea that no platforming increases freedom of speech doesn't make much sense. To the guy for that, I wasn't meaning to minimise your experience. If you genuinely feel that you can't, you can't have a conversation with a friend about these issues, that's something I wasn't aware was happening on British universities. I'm uncomfortable with the idea that students can't have a debate in class. No platforming, as I've read about it and understand it in UK universities, has mainly been about high-profile speakers, and I interpret that as a protest gesture.
there's absolutely nothing anybody could ever say that would put you in physical danger. There's no speech, no words that could ever endanger you. The fact of words is that they're just words. But the point is that they're extremely useful and powerful, and the way that we deal with arguments we don't like is we counter them. This is how society has always progressed. I think we're underestimating how progressive and liberal our universities are on the whole, and how people are, we don't endorse racist, we don't agree with racist and homophobic views. It's not the case. Allowing these people to speak isn't going to suddenly turn an entire student body towards the BNP or, something like that. It's just complete hyperbole to say that. I think both students who are told that or outside speakers who are told that they can't say you can't say that at university, and students who are told that they need to be protected and saved from offensive speech should join together and give the two-fingered salute to safe spaces, because anything else is completely infantilizing and patronizing.
Thank you very much.